afternoon, everyone. My name is Brooke Butari, and I am the Executive Director of Alumni Relations for the American College of Financial Services. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Alumni Association Knowledge and Network webcast, The Riley Case. Today's program is brought to you free by the American College of Financial Services Alumni Association and our event sponsor, One America, who we'd especially like to thank for their support. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items to review. I would like to remind everyone who is watching live that today's session is eligible for CFP CE and American College CE. You will need to submit the 2 CE codes via the survey link that will be emailed to you following the presentation and available in the chat for CFP CE. For American College CE, you will simply self-report in the student portal. This session is not eligible for state-specific CFP CE. The first CE code for today is 192706. Again, that's 192706. If you encounter any technical issues, we will work to assist you. Just send a message there in the chat. And additionally, feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and we will look to discuss them with Phil at the end of the presentation, time permitting. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce the American College's Sally B. and William B. Wallace Chair in Philanthropy, Phil Cubeta, who will present today's webcast, The Riley Case.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. The title is The Riley Case, Can This Case Be Saved? I looked at a little bit about you. It looks like most of you are in financial services. That's the big part of the pie chart. And then law, walking around the circle. Accounting in gray, fundraising in yellow. It's great to see the nonprofit people here. And community foundations, the next slice over. And then the green, nonprofit management. And I'm very glad to have you here. How experienced are you working with business owners? Kind of a bell-shaped curve there, but there are quite a few of you who are not at all experienced and a few who are quite experienced. What percentage of business owners in transition do you discuss philanthropic tools with? Donor advised funds, foundations, general remainder trusts. How about the tools? And starting with the upper left, 0 to 10% don't discuss only 0 to 10% of you. 10 to 25% of you say you discuss it, 25 to 50%, and then 50 to 75%, and very few all the time. So you do to some degree discuss charitable tools. But I think the other interesting question is when you're talking about tools, do you also talk about impact on society, not just tax savings? So only, if you look at the biggest slice there, that's telling us that 0 to 10% of you say you don't really discuss impact at all. So I think that one takeaway from this talk will be the impact conversation is as important as the financial conversation, if not more so. How confident are you in putting the conversation on that basis about impact? Many of you said not at all, but 35% said somewhat, and a few of you, about 25%, 20%, say you're quite comfortable with it. Now, what about the market context for what we're talking about today? Business owners in transition, boomer business owners in transition. Actually, the boomers are where the money is by generation. You see, the silent generation is still around. They still have some, but almost 60% of wealth in America is in the hands of the boomers. Which means with the leading edge of the boomers now age 73, there's going to be an enormous wealth wave passing. It's estimated to be 70 trillion. And of that, some people say a third may go to nonprofits. Now that depends on how good of a job we as planners and the nonprofits do, but it could be as much as a third of 30 trillion. Now you might call this the estate planning market, except the estate planning market went away with recent estate tax reform. If you look at the number of taxable estate returns over these periods, you can see it's almost down to nothing. I mean, how many estate tax attorneys are there in the United States, and how many estate tax taxable returns were filed last year? It's getting to be pretty scarce. So I would say estate planning is becoming legacy planning. Everybody needs a legacy plan, but a traditional tax savings plan, not so many people need that. A lot of the wealth we're talking about is actually in illiquid assets, particularly business assets. This study says self-employed business owners who actively manage their own firms own around 70% of the wealth of the top 0.1%. So this wealth is locked up in non-cash assets, business interests. According to a recent UBS survey, 41% of closely held business owners, like the Rileys, expect to exit their business in the next 5 years. So this is a very hot topic. Why do these plans fail? Why do legacy estate plan exit plans fail? We're trained in tax tools and techniques, but that's not why these plans fail. A famous study said 60% of the time is because the family doesn't communicate with itself very well and trust breaks down. Another big reason things fail is the heirs are ill prepared to get the assets they receive. So what do wealthy families want to pass on to their children? Now, obviously, money comes into it, but money is actually rated about number 4. Number 1 is values and a way of life and traditions. So when I think about passing on more than money, you begin to ask questions that are a little bit different. Who are we as individuals and as a family? What are the principles that guide us as individuals and as a family? What impact do we want to have while we're alive or after we're gone on others in our community and on the world? So in this context, let's meet the Rileys. This case was developed by Dave Holliday, who's a well-known financial planner who crunched the numbers for me. Now, this is the Rileys. Their net worth about $22 million, of which most is in their business. Ultrastone Inc. was the first business they developed. It's a brick manufacturing company. It's actually in Texas. And that's the home base, okay? But then that was so successful that they franchised it into Ultrastone USA. So there are 2 Ultrastone businesses. One is local and one's a franchise. They're doing well, but they're not big spenders. These are the millionaire next door kind of people. They spend about $20,000 a month after tax. They have 3 kids in their 40s, and they have 5 grandchildren. That's their son, GARRETT. He's the only son or child in the business. When they were asked on the fact finder by the advisor how they wanted the chips to fall at their death, they said 75% to our family, 25% to charity at our death, and 0% to taxes. So those became the planning goals the first time we did this case. Now, the first time we're working on this case, we're doing it under prior law. And we're going to look at the contrast between a state tax version of the case and one that has to be driven more by values. So the first time we go around on the numbers, we're going to be looking at it under prior law when they actually did have an estate tax. And in current law, they don't. And we're really asking, would the case close under the old law? Would it close under the new law? So they are generous people in a way. These are where their gifts are going. And you can see those gifts total about $30,000 a year, which is quite a bit if you're only taking out $20,000 a month for yourself to spend, but maybe not so much if you're worth $20 million. So it's a lot or a little depending. This is their core team of advisors. They've got Ted, who's a financial advisor, as many of you are. There's Rose, the CPA, and Shirley, their attorney. And there are also nonprofit players in the mix. You've got Luciana, who heads up a small local nonprofit, a community organization that works with kids in high school who are in trouble. And GARRETT, whose picture you saw earlier, was such a person. He was a football player, was captain of the team. He was very charismatic, drinking and driving. He almost killed somebody. And the family credits Luciana with turning him around. And that's where their money goes in terms of giving. It's the biggest single gift is to Luciana's organization. But she really knows nothing about plan giving, estate planning, financial planning. She's a person who works with kids. Then there's Pastor John in their church, who again knows nothing about money, but he tries to raise some. There's Bernadette, who raises money for the university that they went to. There's Chad, who heads up a community foundation. There's Lana, who is an attorney and works with a religious foundation upstream from Pastor John's church. So she's a financial and estate planning expert, and Pastor John can turn to her because she's running a foundation. She's part of a foundation. Let's say it's a Baptist foundation, Methodist foundation, Catholic foundation. And then there's Laura, who is a planner working for a national gift fund. So these are some of the people in their ecosystem. I'm not going to be heavy on the numbers, but I do want you to know a competent, very competent planner crunched them. So this is under the prior law. And you can see, under the prior law, yes, $21 million estate did generate estate tax and expenses, about $4 million. There was some insurance in the mix, and the family netted out to about $19 million. They said they wanted to be generous, but they weren't. That's not uncommon. In the charity box, we have 0 down the bottom left-hand side. But let me explain it to you the way I'd explain it to the Rileys, so it has a little bit more human ring to it. Now, again, this is under the prior law, and there was a $3 million income tax that was due on sale to business. Now, this was the recommended plan by Dave Holliday. He was the expert planner we brought in to work on this. You can see it has many more moving parts. But the active ingredients on the prior law essentially were putting in place a donor-advised fund to reduce tax on sale to business. You could put the business, part of the business anyway, into the donor-advised fund and sell it and avoid at least some of the income tax. The other big ingredient is a testamentary charitable lead annuity trust, which basically you take the taxable estate, the part of the estate that's going to be taxable, and you put in the charitable lead trust. You have a stream of payments going out to charity for a term of years, I think it was like 18 years, and dial up the payout rate so that the IRS says the asset disappeared. And then the heirs get whatever's left in that trust, which can actually be more than what's put in. So you could call it a deferred inheritance trust. It reduces estate tax to 0, and that was appealing to the Rileys. So donor advised fund is then the recipient of the cash flow from the charitable lead trust. So it's kind of staying in the family in a way. Tax will stay in the charitable lead trust, flow into the donor advised fund, and then out into the community. So how would we explain this in terms the donor can understand, the client can understand? Now, Mary is the comptroller, and her husband built the business. So Mary is checking the numbers here. And we did crunch all the numbers. So when she asked, do we have enough for ourselves throughout our lifetime? Yes, we did do that. We did the cash flow analysis. And as their life goes on, their net worth continues to grow because they're not living on very much. And yes, the kids are going to get no less than $5 million, depending on the year of death. And yes, we did zero out the estate tax under prior law. And we do reduce income tax by using that donor advised fund. So all the math is working out pretty well. And we're going to sell Ultrastone USA, the franchise, to an outside buyer for $12 million. And we're going to sell the land with it. And we're going to put the land into a charitable donor advised fund before sale to reduce the gain. Tax on gain, yes. We're going to get a deduction for doing that to offset the gain on the part we sell outside the donor advised fund, yes. And we're going to sell the local business gradually, JD says, to the employees so he can stay involved. He's now in his 70s, but he'd like to stay involved, kind of crawl out of it. And you can put some stock into the donor advised fund, have the employees buy it back, and you can pace yourself through that as you might like to do. Yes. And the employees end up owning the company, which he really likes because he likes taking good care of his employees because he's going to be buying it back gradually. And we may need some insurance to make sure the heirs get enough. So we did buy more insurance, yes. And you factored the premiums, he asked us, into the cash flow so we know we can afford it. Yes, we did. And our net worth continues to go up despite the insurance premiums. Yes. Pay for bills. Yes. And the lake house is going to stay in the family. Well, yes. And at death, the IRA and the 401k are going to the donor advised fund to avoid taxation. Yes. And estate tax, income tax, both avoided by having go to the DAF. Yes. So here's where it gets interesting. Mary is saying, okay, I've done the math. I've looked back and forth around in your charts. And while you've been talking, I've been thinking, am I right with the plan you're proposing? We can actually give $450,000 a year out of our donor advised fund, starting as soon as we put this plan into motion for the next 11 years, when you're saying is a life expectancy. Yes. And at our death, the children could give at that rate too for another 18 years through this lead trust? Yes, that's what we're saying. We basically computed your charitable capacity. It's about $450,000 a year ongoing. So, do you think they will sign off? Now, we don't have a poll rigged up into this, but I've given this talk so often, I can tell you basically what people say. Will they sign? Won't they sign? Everybody's a little bit torn, but I would say of the times I present this to sophisticated audiences that work with wealthy families, it's about 80-20 or 75%, 20%. About 25% say, yeah, they'll sign because you've done everything they ask you to do. And about 75% or 80% say, I'm not so sure for lots of reasons, including the complexity of it all. So here's some insights from the experts surveyed. Laura Malone works with a donor-advised fund company, American Endowment Foundation, and she goes into some of the nuances about using a donor-advised fund. If you're interested in those nuances, there's a great book published by the American College called Charitable Gifts of Non-Cash Assets by Brian Klontz, and you can download it for free from his website. You can Google it. Tony Macklin is a consultant to wealthy families. He does not sell product. He's strictly consulting on philanthropy about impact. And he had this to say: my gut says to have them start with a larger gift to that local charity, Save Our Kids Who Saved GARRETT, rather than detour it through a fund, because it hits the heart of their passion. They like the idea of getting started sooner, and they like keeping an eye on things. And they could choose to involve the kids and grandkids in a conversation about the gift and the values it reflects. Dr. Jason Franklin, who teaches philanthropy at Grand Valley State University and has a foundation in his family, says, you know, Phil, I'm troubled because I see the Rileys moving too quickly into the numbers. If I was sitting with them at the table when they were discussing these issues on the Texas Moon, I would also strongly encourage them to find an additional advisor who can help them envision their future. If you're working with people like the Rileys, they'll say, you know, we're going to die with our boots on, and they're going to have to carry us out of this business feed first. They've got to be able to visualize a future before they're going to be willing to exit. Mark Alton last year was president of the NAPEC, National Association of Estate Planning Society. And what he said was, how can they leverage the family wealth to promote individual and family flourishing? Now, Mark is a very smart guy, but he's not that smart. That phrase, family flourishing, comes from James E. Hughes, who kind of invented the kind of planning we're doing here. Family, very sophisticated estate planning oriented to family flourishing, not just moving money around. Specifically, he says, how do they intend to grow and develop the most important assets they have, the individual and human, intellectual, and relationship capital? How do they become more successful as a family, more successful as human beings? And how can the wealth help us do that? Now, Jay Cherney is a doctorate in therapy, does family therapy around money, really. And he says, when I look at the Rileys through my psychology lens, I see a family on the brink of a major transition to a whole new life. This change is a rich opportunity for learning and growth, but it's also potentially an emotional minefield. Tim Belber, attorney who works with wealthy families, particularly business transition families, says before doing a deep dive into strategies, JD and Mary need an advisor who can be a true thinking partner to them as they create the vision. That's kind of chastening to be told that by Tim. We probably should have thought of that earlier. This is Mark Weber, very successful financial advisor in Omaha, who says, people used to do, he actually took me out for lunch, he and I are good friends, and we're discussing the Riley case, and he's very kind, but he's also extremely competent. He was kind of cluing me in. He said, you know, Phil, people used to do these full financial plans like you're showing here 20 years ago, but most of my clients already have a plan and are constantly modifying it to meet changing circumstances. Help them make one decision at a time. What he's saying is a big multidimensional plan like this can be cognitive overload, and it could be a good reason why the Rileys aren't going to sign. It's just too much. I presented this to advisors in philanthropy, and here are some of the comments from that group. I asked, do you think they'll sign this under prior law? And some people said, yeah, because it meets all their goals. But most people said, I'm not so sure, it's too complex. They can't digest it all. This man is John A. Warnick, JD LLM. He's an ACTEC attorney, and he's superb. And he runs an organization called Purposeful Planning Institute. It's a membership organization. And when I was presenting, he raised his hand, and I'll never forget it, really. What he said to me was, in front of the audience, Phil, are we planning for the heirs, with the heirs, or at the heirs? And I was so embarrassed because I teach this stuff, but you get caught up in the technical and you forget it. Unfortunately, we are, John, planning at the heirs. We've not involved them in the conversation, and that's a fatal mistake. Should we involve the heirs, and when? Very tricky conversation, because there are privacy issues. You don't want to spoil them or let them know they're going to inherit a lot of money. But shouldn't we at least involve them before the plan is signed or soon after? Rod Zeeb runs an organization, is a JD, and he runs an organization called Heritage Institute, which trains people to this kind of work. And he suggests that we should hold an alignment meeting at the lake house to discuss the family, their mission, their plan, and their philanthropy somewhere along the line, but sooner rather than later, to get them in alignment. So how could we do better? This is Patricia Angus. She's been a mentor to me. She's really a star, a very humble person, but I think really a star at this kind of work. And here's her kind words straightening me out. She said, at first, Phil, I found myself tempted to jump into the planning like you want us to do. But then I found myself needing to step back. When all the facts are laid out in front of you, it's easy to think that a single plan is possible. But of course, we know that's not how things really work. Well, thank you, Patricia. I'd forgotten that. She said, stepping back is vital, not just to the advisors, but also for the family. And by stepping back, I mean both changing one's lens to see the bigger picture, but also to take a deep breath and think about what can and should be done, as well as when, how, and by whom. So she's really good at this. So that was under the old law. And I think even under the old law, we had every tax advantage. About 80% of the people were saying, I don't think it's going to close. So it's even going to be harder this time around. We look at the same set of facts a couple of years later, several years later, under the new law. So imagine JD is still in the business. He's now probably pushing 73, 74, 75. He can't keep this up forever. But he says, when I look at the plan again, as we remind him of the importance of having an exit plan, he says, I see it saved me $4.5 million under the old law, but, frankly, who cares? We don't owe any, my accountant says, under the new law. Why should I revisit this? Now, somebody has to step forward, and I'm really appreciative of the fact we have nonprofit people, community foundation people, attorneys, CPAs, financial advisors on the call today. Somebody has to step forward, and it may not be one of the traditional advisors. It may or may not be, but somebody has to step forward to nudge this case forward, probably on some basis other than tax. If we're going to end in a different place with this case, we're going to have to start in a different place. That's a great phrase from Todd Fithian. So on this go-round, let's start with some reflections on purpose. Involve them thinking about what they're trying to accomplish, not just the how they're going to do it, and how they could work with advisors and how they could partner with a nonprofit. These reflections are the Riley Zone work, but we can provide an essential function in putting them in mind of considerations like this. It's a very different kind of conversation. There's a lot more silence. And a lot of this is conversation they got to have with each other and in themselves in the dark of the night. This is Michael Shaughnessy, who teaches ethics at a prep school in San Francisco. And he heard me address a case study like this. He served on a board of a nonprofit I was associated with. And he said to me after, Phil, I probably shouldn't say anything. I'm a Jesuit priest. I took a vow of poverty. What do I know about money? But it reminds me a little bit of the question we asked the kids in prep school. What kind of person do you want to be in what kind of world? What a marvelous kind of question to ask JD and Mary. What kind of people do you want to be? What kind of community do you want to live in and leave behind? Jay Steenhuisen has had an interesting career. He's been head of the National Conference of Philanthropic Planning, PPP, as it was then called. He's also raised money for Brown. He's worked for Harris Bank, and he has some very well-known clients who are quite wealthy, whose names you'd recognize. He likes to begin an interview with people like the Rileys, and I think this would work really well for the Rileys by asking a question like this. JD and Mary, do you recognize any element of luck, blessing, or grace in your success? Now, if they say no, we did it our way, like Frank Sinatra, you probably don't have a philanthropic prospect, but I suspect they would have a lot to say. This is The World We Want, and Peter Karoff, who was the founder of the Philanthropic Initiative, is really a pioneer in this kind of work, and he likes to ask these questions. JD and Mary, what is your vision of a better world or a better hometown? What conditions are needed to realize it? What are the obstacles, like a SWOT analysis? And what parts of the vision are realistic? And what ideas, strategies, and tactics or plans can make it so? Visualize the world you want and take steps to achieve it. Tracy Gary has been a wonderful mentor to me. She wrote a great book on legacy planning. She inherited money as a young woman from the Pillsbury family. And by the time she was about 30, 35, she had given it all away. And she spent her career helping other people make better gifts. These are her questions, and I've kind of preserved her language because she's so much more eloquent than I am. She would ask JD and Mary, what would you like to change or preserve in the world? Change or preserve. Has past giving reflected your hopes? Now, I'm not really sure what that means, but I think she's suggesting that sometimes we make gifts and we're disappointed. What are the causes you're concerned about, and what are the powers behind those issues? What's the cause behind the issue? If you're concerned about so many children being poor, what's causing that? What might change that situation? You're not going to change the world by yourself, no matter how rich you are. Who joins you in the work? Family and friends and other donors and nonprofits you can partner with. Who joins you in the work? And you're not going to get it right on the first shot, making change in the world. You're going to have to experiment. You're going to have to revise. The important thing is to get started. That's Lindsay Matouche and Melinda McElhaney from Vario Philanthropy in St. Louis, and they have some really great, fresh questions. They might ask, do you have any debts of gratitude? And I can just see the Rileys opening up about that. What would friends say is your soapbox? What are you on about? And you're giving to a lot of places. Where might you sacrifice breadth for depth to make a bigger difference? This is Dien Yuen, who's joined us in the CAP program as a professor of philanthropy. And I was presenting some of this stuff to her in a restaurant in San Francisco. And she said to me, I've got another one for you. I've got a question. I said, okay. She said, I work with many times with heirs of women particularly, who've inherited fortunes from Asia. And I sometimes ask them this: were there things you wanted to do in life that your father said you couldn't? Whoa. And when I present this in the US to advisors, I often get the response, well, that's fine for Asian women, but it's not true here in America. There's not that kind of thing going on. I don't think that's true. I think very often when we get into this passing on values, we mean the parents' values to the kids, and sometimes that's a tight fit. And I think the question is, do you want your kids to have your values, or do you want them to develop their own? This is Charlie Collier, and he was the premier fundraiser at Harvard. He actually won the Harvard Gold Medal for fundraising. The first question really hits me hard because I spent a lot of time in technical financial planning and estate planning outfits. And, it gets to be a routine, a lot of boilerplate, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of routinized activity. But listen to this first question. JD and Mary, what principles have guided your legacy planning to date? If I read your documents over, what principles would I see in them? And I think I know the answer, and it makes me sad. I'm almost positive I know the answer because I've been trained in the answer. The answer is the principles we plan for are fear, greed, and control. If you look at the planning documents in front of you, you'll discover fear, greed, and control. Fear of losing the money, fear of losing control, wanting to control from the grave, always the desire for more. That's the motives we attribute to our clients, but they may not be the client's actual motives, and you won't know unless you ask. And when you ask what principles have guided your legacy planning, and they kind of say, ask them what principles they would like to have guide their planning. And the power of that kind of questioning is it means they've had their planning done by the best firm in town, but it doesn't matter because it wasn't done in the light of their principles. And you can come in and reopen cases that seem to be closed and add significant value. Another question he raises is, what are you up against with your kids? And that's really a way of asking, is a great deal of wealth going to help them or is it going to hurt them? What are you up against with Garrett? I know he had some problems in high school. How's he doing now? How wealthy do you want Garrett to be? How wealthy do you want his brothers and sisters to be? Is there a limit? Another conversation, I think, for JD and Mary and also people at midlife and the midlife transition. Jill, when you were younger, were there things you wanted to accomplish in life that you haven't yet done? And how could you still get back to that while you have time, either by transitioning in mid-career or doing it in retirement? Or if it turns out you just can't do it, could you make it possible for somebody else to do it? You want to be a pianist, you end up running a brick company. You probably can't be a pianist now, but could you make that possible for somebody else? This is one I think attorneys and accountants and numerical people tend to like because it's almost like a closing question as you're getting close to putting a plan together or you're reviewing their current plans. You can say something like, you've done a great job, JD and Mary. You've done a great job for yourself, your employees, your business. You've done wonderful in life. But beyond yourself and your employees and your business and your family, is there anywhere else in the world on which you'd like to make a positive impact while you're alive or after you're gone? Now, I guarantee you, if you ask that question, you're going to get phenomenally interesting answers because people have unexpected sides to them that will come surging to the surface. And then that becomes a planning goal. It's not just nice to know, it's a planning goal at that point to make that impact possible. Now, this is Sharna Goldesker. She's the founder of 2164. That's her book, Impact Generation. She's an inheritor, I think 3 or 4 generations deep in the Bronfman family, who are the Seagram's family, one of the wealthiest families in North America. And she's addressing this from an heir's perspective. Most of us work with the people who make the money, but then we pass it on to the heirs without much consideration for what it's going to mean to the heirs. So let's get an heir's perspective. She's a wonderful person. These are wise comments, questions really. What legacy have I inherited from my famous family and from our community? How does that legacy inform who I am and how I see the world? Am I simply an heiress? Am I simply somebody who inherited the money? What have I become in the shadow of that prior greatness? How do I differentiate myself from it and become my own person? Now, this is Jenny Santi. That's her book, The Giving Way to Happiness. She works with wealthy families around the world. And this is a great little question she has. Who is your giving tribe? JD and Mary. And honestly, JD and Mary do not have a giving tribe, do they? They're checkbook givers. They're giving the money away, but they're not doing it in community with anybody, and they're not getting much satisfaction out of it, and they're not learning from anybody. This is Coventry Edwards-Pitt, who's Chief Wealth Advisory Officer at Ballantine Partners, which is a family office in Boston. That's her book, Aged, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. And these are some of her questions for people who are getting a little older, like the Rileys. Interesting, empathetic questions. Has your relationship to money changed as you've gotten older? Well, honestly, it has. It will. The answers you get to that will be indicative of the kind of wisdom they've acquired along the way. If you don't have it, it means one thing to you. Once you do have it, it means something else. Have you evolved in the way you think about money and use money? What's been the most rewarding thing you've done with your money as you've gotten older? It probably is not going to be consumption. Now, this is Rabbi Mordechai Liebling. He teaches fundraising at a rabbinical seminary in Philadelphia. And he's been a mentor to me. And I'm still learning from what he said. And this is his remark. It's about legacy planning. Your last will and testament is your final teaching. What do you want it to say? That's essentially the stakes we're playing for every time we do these documents. Your last will and testament, JD and Mary, is your final teaching to your kids. What do you want it to say? So people like JD and Mary do need our technical chops. They absolutely do. They've got to be able to answer these 3 questions somewhere in the discovery agreement process. How much do we need for ourselves as essentially retirement planning? How much do we want each child to get? Now, that's a fact-finding question that needs to be dwelt upon in order to arrive at an answer, because it's not obvious. And what will be our legacy once we're gone? The first question admits of math, right? You can all do this. Lifetime expenses, present valued back. Who can answer that? Well, you all can answer that. What's the answer? We ran the numbers, and for JD and Mary, I can tell the exact number. Dave Holliday, one of the best planners in the country, came up with the right answer. Here it is. $10,198,684. That's what they need to go broke at death. You know, if they had that much money, it would last them a lifetime. They've actually got 20 million, so they're fine. And because they're spending so little, their net worth is going to continue to grow. Their current net worth is 20 million, and life expectancy is 30. How much is enough for each heir? Well, you got 30 million, you got 3 kids. That's 10 million each at life expectancy. So if they each got 10 million, at 5%, that's $500,000 a year for life. That's $375,000 per kid for a lifetime after tax. Now, JD and Mary are living on what? $220,000, $240,000. So do they really want to leave the kids with enough money that the kids can retire the day JD and Mary die and then live better than JD and Mary did? Does that make sense? Will it make sense if it's framed properly? An exercise I learned from Scott Fithian, and it's been taken up by others as well, is the final spending spree to kind of get at what the parents would like to leave to the heirs. Do you want to give them a house? Do you want to give them a vacation house? Do you want to have an education fund, a retirement fund, cars, 2 cars, 3 cars, jewelry, private clubs? When you add all that up, most people say something less than what they could give to the kids, wealthy families. They usually put some kind of a limit to it. And then by subtraction, really, you can figure out the legacy is going to be. You got $30 million from net worth at death, minus, let's say, they're deciding $5 million each for the kids, times 3, leaves you what's going to be left over, piling up in the estate to go to charity at death. That's under the new law. So what if we have an alignment meeting at the lake house? We could give them an update on the business sale. We give the kids an update on the retirement plans. We give them an update on how they have thought through the amount the kids are going to get. We can update them on philanthropic capital, and we can invite them into the process of planning for that money as a family. And I can imagine coming out this wonderful picture. That's, I love that little girl. So it's JD, Mary, and their daughter and their granddaughter. And part of what's coming out of this is now there's a pool of money, a pretty big pool of money, 15 million total. They can be given away some way, shape, or form. And we're going to involve the children, the grandchildren in that. And I imagine the little girl saying, you know, Grandpa and Grandma, my brother and me, we want to save dogs. And the parents thinking, you know, isn't this great? She's taking an interest. And I can imagine the little kid coming back, age 4, a year later, saying, you know, Grandpa and Grandma, we shouldn't give to that shelter again. They didn't do what they said they'd do. This year, let's help kids who don't have enough. So she's growing in the role of a giver and starting at the right age. And I can see how that kind of family event would be deeply gratifying to the Rileys as they try to pass on their way of life and what they care about, and see the kids growing into, and the grandkids growing into the kind of people that they would like to see them become, oriented to the good of the world and not just their own good. And I can see how that really would be progress and help us to close the case. And I'd like to think the case does close on this basis. Let's think now about how the Rileys do if we put it on this footing, and how the heirs do. We're going to meet all the goals for tax reduction, personal security, and business exit. We know how to do that. The heirs are going to get the exact right amount. It'll be well communicated to them. Garrett can keep his job. If we're crawling out of the business, he works for the business. We're going to sell some of the business inside the donor advised fund. They can advise on that. How do advisors do with cases like this? Well, the answer is extremely well. Many of you are in this business. You know, it's one of the most lucrative things you can do with your career. The American College trains to it. Dave Holliday told me it would have cost about $40,000 to crunch all the numbers over and over the way we did. If you're an investment advisor, they had a business, a bricks and mortar business and a franchise. It's going to get sold. And a lot of that is going to go into philanthropy inside of a donor advised fund, but you're going to be managing all that formerly illiquid money. It's now been liquid, and it's going to be in the foundation, either in the donor advised fund or outright assets to be managed, 18 million altogether. We factored in $3 million of insurance with a $40,000 premium, second to die. They need new wills and trusts. They need legal agreements to sell the business and the land. They need a business exit coach. They need a fee for qualified appraisals. They need a fee for conducting family meetings. It goes on and on and on. Advisors did very well. But let me ask you, how did Charities do? Well, we started out giving $30,000 a year, and so far we've grown that amount by $1,000 to save dogs. And no dogs have been saved. Even a 4-year-old can see it. So from a certain standpoint, we're not done. We're not even getting started. We still have not achieved impact. We don't have a plan for achieving impact. That's why I think for the many of our clients, they need a partnership with the right nonprofits, a sense of partnership. They're on a journey here. They're selling the company sometime soon. In the process at number 2, they're going to set up a giving vehicle. But then they need to learn how to drive that vehicle to a destination, how to make the donor advised fund or foundation or lead trust serve a purpose of charitable purpose beyond tax savings to accomplish something in the world, saving dogs or something better. As they try to learn how to do that, they're going to get lost. It's not a once and done deal. They're going to make some gifts, make some grants, and then rethink it, get lost and reroute. And ultimately, ideally, they'll achieve family harmony, the joy of giving, and impact on society. And they can need us every step of this way. Now, why don't donors give more? Why don't people like the Rileys give more? There was a very interesting study done, and it's been repeated. It's been done twice with the same results, 2013, again in 2018. When you ask advisors, how come the clients like the Rileys don't give more? They're worth 18 million, 20 million, 21 million. They're only giving 30,000. Why don't they give more? Here's what advisors say. Clients like the Rileys don't feel they have enough for themselves. Well, okay, maybe they don't, but they certainly do. They have enough. They may not feel that way. They don't feel they have enough for the heirs. Well, in reality, they might feel they got too much for the heirs. They don't feel wealthy enough. Okay, that's the advisors. And we've solved for all that throughout the planning. We've shown they have enough for themselves. We've shown the kids get enough. They should feel wealthy enough. And we do have a well-funded charitable tool. But when you ask the donors why they don't give more, you get a completely different set of answers, like from another planet. Of course, all the financial stuff is important to them. They take that for granted and they trust you to do it. But the real reason they say we don't give more is we're afraid our gift is going to be wasted by the charity. It's going to be wasted. We don't feel that connected to the charity. It's just a financial transaction. We don't feel connected. And furthermore, if we give, they're just going to ask us for more. And there may be some truth in that too. We're going to get on the list. So I think there are conversation starters here also for nonprofit people to play a role on the planning team and help people like the Rileys. These are some. JD and Mary, what gifts have given you joy? Or have they all been disappointing or sterile? What gifts do you feel reflect who you are as a person or as a family? What gifts embody your traditions and your values and your personal commitments? For the kind of people you and I deal with, it is about roots to a large degree, sending the elevator back down. Gratitude. Where do you and your family have roots? And if you work with a nonprofit, they may very likely have roots with you, connections that go back a long way, maybe even to birth. And where do you and your family find wings? You have roots in your traditions, but where do you fly? Where do you find wings departing from those? JD and Mary, you've given quite a bit of money away, but do you think of any of your nonprofits as partners in the work? Are there any nonprofits you work with so that they can do something with you they can't do without you, and vice versa, that you can get something done that you can't get done without them? Do you have a partner? And can we be that partner? What would it take for us to be that partner? If you're an advisor and you're doing this kind of work seriously, I think there's a piece of this work which is maybe new to you. Even when you find out what they want to do for impact, you connect to the nonprofit. There's some work there in making sure the gift works, making sure the gift does achieve impact. And these are questions you might teach your donors to ask the nonprofit, for the donor to ask the nonprofit. My potential gift to me is in the millions. It's big to me, it's big to you. There's some wealthy people who give. Am I considered big to you? We're to make what to us is a huge gift over time. What are we going to get for the money? How do we know our money's not going to be wasted? What kind of impact am I going to get? And what kind of reporting will you show me to indicate that I have gotten impact? I'm giving money to you, but I want to fund a program. Can I meet the program champion, develop some kind of rapport so I feel like we're on the same team? And so I can see that person's going to do something important. Can we get some recognition? Maybe memorialize a loved one? And what good's going to come of it? Will our gift really matter? And looking at it from the standpoint of impact, what's it going to cost to actually get the job done that we're trying to get done in the world? Can we start small with little test gifts and then ramp it up if you do well with the money we're giving to you? Could we set a long-term goal to make a change in the world through you and pay for it on the installment plan? A gift, a gift, a gift, a gift, more at death. Can we get something going year by year and then top it off at death with a legacy or life insurance? Talk to us about how we're going to get something specific done and how our gift will pay for it. So planning for action from your seat at the table. Whom do you know like the Rileys? And you should know a lot. And I know some of you have nonprofits on the call. These are people who are giving $1,000, $500, a few $1,000s, but their wealth is tied up in their business. Can you position yourself in this conversation? Aging boomers, good-hearted people, donors who have no idea how generous they can be until somebody shows them, nor do they have any idea how much they're going to enjoy it or how much impact they can achieve. So I hope you have learned at least one question or one inflection in your thought process that you can use with your best clients and donors to help them achieve their highest aspirations for themselves, their family, their community, and the world. Our world certainly needs it today. So if you'd like more along these lines, I do teach the CAP program. We'd love to have you in it. And thank you very much for attending. And we will now open it up for any questions you may have.
We did have a question just come in only a minute ago.
Okay.
If you have the source data for the number of taxable estates referenced earlier in the presentation.
I can look it up. I do have it. It's staggering, but it's true.
Sure.
These are IRS. It's IRS data.
Yeah.
It's actual filings. It's actually it's actual tax filings.
I just wonder really quick if you could kind of talk broadly. There's so much going on in the world right now in the aftermath of COVID-19. And I'm wondering just, quick, brief thoughts before we close out today about the impact of this on philanthropy. And if you're seeing or hearing of plans starting to change or adapt because of this.
Yes. And I think above all, what's changing is the outside world is breaking in. I find it really difficult to continue as if nothing has changed. And I'm down in my basement making this broadcast. My wife is upstairs listening to the news, and I hesitate to go up and overhear what's going on in the world. It's very, very hard for us and our donors to concentrate on the technical side of planning when there's so much breaking loose in our society. And I think people are ready to have these conversations about the world around them and how they can have an impact on it. And some of those conversations are going to be emotional, and we're going to need high emotional intelligence to step into it, right? We're going to need high emotional intelligence. I think it's one of the things that is keeping us back. But the most important part is, are you willing to make yourself vulnerable in that way to have these conversations with clients? And it may be COVID, it may be racial justice, it may be whatever the cause is. But are you willing to step into that conversation, even if you don't share those same concerns or you see it differently? And then be of service to them using your planning skills to help them have the impact they would like to have on the world.
Wonderful. One final question here related to the presentation before we wrap up. Someone did ask if you had included inflation in your calculations.
Yeah. The thing of it is, this guy, Dave Holliday, is the star. I hired him because he is the planner of all planners. He did all the inflation. He did the inflation adjusted rates of return. We did every which way to Sunday, and you just couldn't make the family go broke given their spending. But the question is, where do you want the wealth to go? Is a much bigger question than what it's going to be, exactly this number. That you just can't make the family go broke, short of a tremendous financial crisis.
Yeah, true.
Because they live humbly. And so many of our clients do.
The millionaires next door, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. So last question here from Stephen Myers.
Okay, well, I know him well. He's actually in the presentation. Thank you, Stephen. This is going to come from the blind side.
Do you hear from advisors that they're work can have transformational impact on themselves as well as on their clients? What is the source of that kind of change in professionals, and what do they do with their practice after that?
Now, I'm kind of in a good position to see some of that. I think the answer is certainly yes. Let me try to frame that a little bit. You know, when you're dealing with advisors at a certain stage of their careers, like all of us, they're trying to pay the mortgage, they're trying to feed their families, they want to send a kid to college, they want to have an adequate retirement plan, they want to build their business. But there comes a point with successful advisors, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 55, maybe it's 60, maybe it's 65, where they themselves begin to morph and begin to think beyond success because they've achieved it. You know, success is new. They've achieved it already. And they're working with people who they've had as clients over a lifetime or business lifetime. And they also are morphing into philanthropy. And you would be amazed. I'm absolutely amazed what these advisors are willing to do for their communities without getting paid or having any financial advantage in it whatsoever. I've had the opportunity to work with some advisors in the CAP program who have been teaching CAP locally for 10 years. And when I asked them, these are the most successful advisors in the country. When I asked them, are you making money doing this? They laughed. They say, if I wanted to make money, I'd be doing something else. This is not how I make money. But, you know, it's so good for my community. So you do see it. Advisors are very good people. Many advisors are successful because they are good people. And this is a way for them to project their identity forward in a new way. And I think a lot of times advisors don't get credit for that. And if you're a fundraiser, it won't be every advisor. But in your community, there are a dozen advisors who are really aching for the opportunity to make a bigger difference and are willing to put their professional skills to good use through you.
Well, Phil, thank you so much once again for taking the time to be here on behalf of the Alumni Association. And to answer the question that I'm hearing and seeing quite a few people ask, yes, this presentation will be available to be replayed. You will get a link in your email with the survey following this presentation. And so you'll certainly be able to rewatch the presentation. And for those that were not able to attend live, you'll also be able to watch this at your leisure. Even more so, the college does have a webcast page, and we do store presentations on that page. So there's a treasure trove of knowledge living here on the college's webpage. So to close here today, on behalf of the Alumni Association, thank you all again for attending today's presentation. As you may very well know, the college has a number of webcasts planned for the future that you can sign up for on the website. And you might see Phil presenting another one here in the future. And our final CE code for today is 251927. And that's the second code that you can submit via the survey link in the chat here or in the email after this presentation. So again, we welcome your feedback from this event. We are so glad you could join us, and we thank you for attending and have a wonderful afternoon.